A reading from the book of Genesis. That same night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go until you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. This passage we heard this morning from Genesis about Jacob wrestling with a man throughout the night. After deceiving his twin brother Esau and stealing his father's blessing, reminds me of a story of 2 men sitting next to each other in a Boston pub. After a while, one man looks at the other and says, "I can't help but think from listening to you that you're from Ireland." The other guy responds proudly, "Yeah, that I am." The first guy says, "So am I. And whereabout from Ireland might you be?" The other guy answers, "I'm from Dublin, I am." The first guy responds, "Sure and begorra, so am I. And what street do you live on in Dublin?" The other guy says, "A lovely little area it was. I lived in McCleary Street in the old central part of town." The first guy says, "Faith, and it's a small world, so did I. And to what school would you have been going?" The other guy answers, "Well, now, I went to St. Mary's, of course." The first guy gets really excited and says, "So did I. Tell me, what year did you graduate?" The other guy answers, "Well, now, I graduated in 64. The first guy exclaims, "Good Lord must be smiling down upon us. I can hardly believe our good luck at winding up in the same bar tonight. Can you believe it? I graduated from St. Mary's in 64 my own self." About this time, another guy walks into the bar, sits down, and orders a beer. The bartender walks over, shaking his head, and mutters, "It's going to be a long night tonight. The Murphy twins are getting drunk again." It's not likely that Jacob was drunk on that night when he took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children and crossed the ford of the Jabbok, and then left all that he owned behind, and then alone wrestled with a man on the desert floor until daybreak. But he was clearly troubled, and his twin brother Esau was certainly on his mind. Jacob had cheated his brother Esau out of his birthright by pretending to be the eldest son and receiving their father Isaac's blessing. Now, camped with his family on the river Jabbok, Jacob is preparing for an encounter with the brother he cheated, fearing his retribution and fearing the reunion the next day with the brother he had wronged 20 years earlier. And so Jacob sent everyone and everything that he loved across the river and prepared for a dreadful night alone. Picture Jacob lying on the desert floor, staring up at the sky above him. In those days before light pollution became common, the stars visible in the night sky were far more vivid and numerous than we see today. It seemed to Jacob that he could almost reach out and touch the stars above him. A literal belief in a God of the heavens, a Lord who ruled over earth and sky, was central to Jacob's worldview and to all who slept under the stars and beheld the heavens above. A few years ago, astrobiologist Sarah Seeger was awarded a MacArthur Genius Grant. She studies exoplanets, planets that are in orbit around stars other than our sun. Dr. Seeger has devoted her life to the search for signs of life on these exoplanets. In an interview, she was once asked what the chances are that there is life on other planets. She replied, "Let's put it this way. There are 100 billion stars in our galaxy. There are 100 billion galaxies in the universe. The chance that life has evolved somewhere in the universe is 100%. Astronomers began to move away from a terra-centric conception of the solar system after Copernicus, more than 500 years ago, persuasively argued that the Earth and the other planets revolved around the Sun, and that the Earth was not the center of the universe. Yet theologically, and despite our rapidly expanding knowledge of the vastness of the cosmos, most of us still cling to the idea of a God whose attention is focused primarily on the affairs of our tiny third planet from the Sun, circling a star that is tucked away some 26,000 light years from the center of a middling-sized galaxy, one we call the Milky Way. Thinking of the universe in such a grand scale leads me to conceive of God in transcendent terms as well, imagining a God who is distant, above all, reigning supreme, yet permeating all that is, a God who is present in the stuff of stars. That may very well have been the kind of God that Jacob imagined as he drifted to sleep on the desert floor under a sky white with stars. But that image of a transcendent, unknowable God was shattered in the night as Jacob was tossed from his slumber by a man, intent on tearing him from limb to limb, crushing him under his weight, flinging him in the air, breaking his bones, and leaving him at daybreak after an endless night of wrestling, leaving Jacob limping but blessed. No longer could Jacob hold on to an image of a distant Lord of the stars, for he had encountered God face to face, fought to receive his blessing, struggled to know his name, but instead was given a name. He was to be called Israel, the God wrestler. I think that we too want a God that calls us by name. We long for a God that will wrestle us until daybreak. We are compelled, destined to be God wrestlers. We long for God's blessing and maybe even seek the bruising, bone-breaking confrontation that accompanies such a struggle with God. But while we are grappling and groaning in our encounter with a God who is so eminently with us, we may tilt our head away from the battle, with one cheek planted in the grit of the desert floor and one eye casting a glance toward the heavens, where billions of stars crowd the night sky. And like Jacob, we try to understand how the man with whom we wrestle, the God with whom we both crave and fear, is also the Lord of the universe. How can we possibly embrace these two seemingly contradictory conceptions of the divine at the same moment? I've found that the continued revelations of science have expanded and deepened rather than threatened my belief in the existence of God. As astronomers learn of the magnitude and complexity of the universe, so my idea of God extends and expands. As biologists discover how evolution has shaped our planet's life forms, I am astounded and pleased at the intricacy and beauty of the creation process. As particle physicists move ever closer to an understanding of the ultimate structure of matter, even discovering what they've called a God particle, I am filled with amazement and wonder. Yet, while I hold in awe and can intellectually appreciate a God of the cosmos and a God who inhabits the patterns and particles of creation, I long, like Jacob, for God's blessing, and am compelled to wrestle with God in the mud and the blood and the gore in order to receive it. We may worship a cosmic God, reigning supreme amid the stars above, but our hearts long for a God who is willing to get down and dirty with us in the muck of life, wrestling with us amid the bitterness, the pain, the disappointment of a struggle on the shores of life's river. The story of Jacob wrestling with the man is a story of how the mystical God is embodied in the flesh. We can't wrestle until dawn with a transcendent God, but a God who holds us close and calls us by name will leave us limping but blessed.